Something strange has happened to the modern dating market. More people are reporting being single than basically any other time in the last century. Marriage rates are falling, birth rates are plummeting, and millions of people are saying the same thing, is that dating just feels different now. It feels impossible. Why is that? What would you say is the weirdest part about that? The worst thing about it is that this isn't just happening in one country or even one culture or one block of the world. It's happening across the entire developed world. From the United States to Japan to Europe, the same trends are being reported in that people are delaying relationships for longer, fewer long-term commitments, a growing frustration with modern dating. And here's the reason. Historically, whenever dating and relationships fall apart like this, economic pressure tends to reset that system, right? A lot of times when people don't date, it's because economically speaking, they don't need to, right? A lot of times when people will commit to a long-term relationship, they're not necessarily doing it for love. Sure, you have some people that get into a relationship because they're in love, but love is fleeting, right? Love is fading. But bills are forever, right? Economic situations are going to outlast your lust. That's just fact, right? Economic pressures tend to reset systems. And given the current economic environment that we're in, I think that the modern dating market is about to experience a renaissance, and that we're about to see a large uptick in the number of couples and marriages, whereas the last several decades we've seen a steady decline. The difficult economic years of the late 2020s might end up being the catalyst that changes the dating market more than any dating app or any policy ever could. Right? So here we have the modern dating paradox. In theory, dating should be easier than it's ever been. You can meet people instantly using apps like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. You have access to thousands of potential partners within minutes. But paradoxically, what we've seen is more choice has made dating harder. Dating apps created something economists like to call a marketplace dynamic, okay? Instead of meeting someone organically through shared communities and through spaces like work, school, friends, or religious space, people are browsing profiles like products on a shelf. And marketplaces behave differently than real world communities, okay? They concentrate attention at the top, the highest quality product that someone can find. A small percentage of users on these apps receive a overwhelming majority of the attention of people on these apps, right? While many others that use these apps tend to feel invisible, right? This cycle of frustration is created on both sides of the market, right? Some people are overwhelmed with options and overwhelmed with choice and are getting a disproportionate amount of the attention from, because that's what this is, it's the attention market, right? And some people are commanding a large market share while others feel like they have basically none at all, right? So now we're seeing the collapse of shared social spaces. Another major shift in the disappearance of traditional meeting environments. For decades, people met partners through things like school and work, religious communities, mutual friend groups, local activities, shared hobbies, you name it. But many of these spaces have weakened over the preceding 20 years for various reasons, right? Remote work reduced workplace interactions. Social media replaced many in-person communities. Younger generations are socializing generally less offline, right? Less face-to-face interaction than previous generations, which I don't know about you, but it seems that it's a lot more difficult to convince somebody you don't know to go on a date with you when you're talking to them over a screen, right? How many times have you tried to get someone to even just to FaceTime you, to give you a phone call? Sometimes it's not that easy, right? A lot of people are, again, paradoxically, much more timid when talking to someone online than in person. Even bars and social venues have seen declining attendance in many places. When people stop gathering physically, relationship formation declines as a result of this, right? Dating apps attempted to replace those social ecosystems, to fill that void, but what we have found is not only have they failed to do that, they've further exacerbated the decline of the systems. See, these apps aren't designed to create stable communities, which is what you really need to have a healthy dating environment. Right? These apps are designed to keep users swiping and to keep users engaged, but they're not designed to create interactions between people. They're not designed to create and foster senses of belonging and communities for people, which is what people need to feel comfortable to essentially approach somebody that they don't know. Okay, so economic pressure and relationship timing, right? Another factor that is really shaping the modern dating market is economics, right? Younger generations are facing some of the toughest financial conditions in decades, and that's throughout the entire Western world. And really not just the Western world, but mostly the world at large. Younger generations are are required to shoulder a much larger burden financially than their preceding generations. Right? Housing costs have exploded. Student debt is a very common thing. And many people just feel financially unstable, well into their mid 30s. Historically, economic uncertainty causes people to delay major life milestones, right? Such as getting married or having children, or just basically any long-term commitment, such as buying a house or, just long-term commitments, right? It causes people to feel uncertain, which causes them to feel not stable in their lives. And when you don't feel stable, you're not going to commit to a major life decision that could potentially fall apart on you a year from now due to your economic uncertainty, right? But here's the thing, there is an interesting historical pattern to all this. While moderate economic uncertainty does delay relationships, severe economic uncertainty often has the opposite effect, right? When you have a economy in decline, but things are still relatively good for the average person, people tend to delay relationships. They tend to delay major life decisions. But interestingly enough, what the data has shown is that when severe economic instability comes, when things get even worse, people tend to become more risk-taking. They tend to seek out relationships out of necessity, right? Because you can avoid, committing to something when times are still relatively okay. It's when times get really bad that you have nothing left to lose, essentially, or by that same metric, you have everything left to lose, and then you will take a commitment on something. Right? During difficult economic eras, people often start prioritizing stability, partnership, and long-term planning again. Right? So as times get tougher, a relationship starts to look a lot less like endless opportunities on an app and more about mutual benefit, right? Which, let's be real, that historically that's really what a relationship has fundamentally been about, right? It's never really been about love. That's a very modern concept. That's a very modern luxury that people have only had really in the past century, right? Historically, relationships were about mutual financial benefit. They weren't about love. Love is a very modern concept that is a luxury belief that is a byproduct of a good economy, of a great economy, rather. All right? So let's look at the psychology of infinite choice, which is what these dating apps have brought to the market, is infinite choice. Dating apps also introduced a psychological shift for people. When people feel like better options might always be one swipe away, it becomes a lot harder for people with a plethora of choices to commit, right? Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When options are unlimited, people often feel less satisfied when the choices that they do make, right? Especially in something like dating, this can lead to shorter relationship spans, constant comparison, and a fear of settling down, right? But economic hardship historically reduces this mindset, okay? When life becomes more uncertain and tomorrow is not guaranteed and your situation looks unstable, people tend to focus a lot less on maximizing options, and they tend to focus a lot more on building reliable partnerships. Because when you get into a situation to where your capacity as an individual to maintain your lifestyle comes into question, you're going to start looking for somebody else to come into the void, right? To help you fill that gap. So why do hard economic times change social behavior, right? So throughout history, economic pressure has pretty reliably shaped social norms, okay? So during difficult periods, people often rely more on family and close relationships. They tend to prioritize stability over experimentation, and they tend to value long-term commitments more highly than when times are good, right? So in other words, community becomes more important again as the economy gets worse. So when housing costs are high and economic conditions look unstable, partnerships with another person can actually become an economic advantage instead of a disadvantage, right? When times are good and you've got more than enough for yourself, well, looking at a committed relationship with somebody else can be a disadvantageous thing to you, because that requires you to compromise on your values, and it requires you to compromise on your free time and to allocate your resources in a different way rather than just doing it as whatever you want to do essentially with your time, right? But when economic uncertainty rears its ugly head, then all of a sudden a partnership with another person becomes an advantage instead of a disadvantage, right? Because that person can help you rein in a sense of stability that you're going to lose on your own as times get harder, right? Sharing expenses, sharing responsibilities, and emotional support from another person becomes a practical thing for you rather than a luxury. In stable economic booms, independence tends to rise. In harder times, interdependence tends to rise, right? I'll say that again. In stable economic times, independence rises, but when times get hard, interdependence rises, right? That's very clearly what the data shows, is that as times get harder, people tend to pair up, right? It's mutual benefit, it's survival. So why do I think we're looking at a potential cultural reset, right? So in the late 2010s and even the early 2020s, things were shaped mostly by abundance in the digital world, okay? We had unlimited content, unlimited entertainment, unlimited dating options, a limitless sea of possibility. But as the economic conditions have tightened, cultural priorities will shift along with that tightening, right? People will start valuing things that feel more durable, that are more real, right? Things like long-term friendships, stable relationships, real world, real life communities that offer mutual benefit to the people involved in them, right? That doesn't mean that things like dating apps are just going to disappear forever, but it does mean that the influence that these apps have and these online communities have are going to weaken as people rediscover the older ways, the tried and true ways of meeting partners, right? It is vastly more effective to meet someone in person and will almost basically guarantees you a better outcome when you're able to read someone's tone, when you're able to see their facial expressions, when you're able to get the full picture in person in real time, versus when you're making all these assumptions in your head, what you think someone's tone is, what you think somebody's about based on a profile, based on a paragraph, based on a picture, right? You can't get the full picture of somebody through a dating app, but you can certainly get the full context of an interaction with somebody in person, right? Things like social circles, hobbies, and shared environments will begin to become more valuable again as the economy gets worse, right? And things like digital presence and online presence will become less valuable as times get harder. So what really can we take from all this, right? What's the conclusion of all this? The conclusion is that the modern dating market isn't something that broke overnight, right? It changed slowly over time through, emergent technologies, cultural and societal shifts, and a change in the economic conditions of the society. Dating apps expanded choice, but they weakened community, right? Economic uncertainty delayed commitment. But as social spaces where people once met disappeared, they will begin to reemerge as these times get harder and as people seek out meaningful relationships. Right? History really suggests something here, and it's that when times get harder, people often rediscover the value of partnership. They rediscover the value of community. They rediscover mutual benefit, and the idea of being selfish becomes less and less valuable. And that's not just from a romantic perspective, but for the sense of stability, of support, and building a successful life with someone, right? Which means that means to me that the next phase of dating culture might look very different from what we've seen over the past 10 years, where the swipe-based world of the 2010s and early 2020s existed on the internet. That world is going to come to an end, because sometimes the forces that disrupt society are the same ones that rebuild it, right? The economic conditions that will tear down these old systems will also be the driving forces for change that will build sustainability in the new world. So that's my rant, and I'll see you next time.
Loser.